Welcome to Module 1B of the LRC-South's Inclusive Education Paraprofessional Training Series. This module will focus on presuming competence, a foundation of inclusive education. Our objectives in this session are to understand the concept of the least dangerous assumption and why presuming competence can be considered the least dangerous assumption. Here's an overview of what we'll cover in this session. We'll begin by establishing shared understanding of the goal of inclusive education. Then we'll look at the criterion of the least dangerous assumption, followed by the presumption of competence. We'll wrap up with an opportunity for you to dive deeper into this content. To get us started, it's important to establish shared understanding of where we hope to go, or the broader goals of inclusive education. These modules and our work together in them is guided by the idea that, according to disability rights activist Norm Kuntz, inclusive education is the valuing of diversity within the human community. When inclusive education is fully embraced, we abandon the idea that children have to become normal in order to contribute to the world. We begin to look beyond typical ways of becoming valued members of the community, and in doing so, begin to realize the achievable goal of providing all children with an authentic sense of belonging. One of the necessary steps in moving towards this goal and fostering the kind of authentic belonging that Kuntz is referring to is to confront and adjust our own assumptions about and responses to disability and difference. The criterion of the least dangerous assumption is an idea developed by special education scholar Ann Donnellan that holds that, in the absence of absolute evidence, it is essential to make the assumption that, if proven false, would be least dangerous to the individual and their present and future opportunities. This criterion urges those who work in schools, like you, to resist deficit-based perspectives of student capabilities, confront limiting ideas of what we think intelligent looks and sounds like, and to look closely at instruction, environments, and supports for reducing barriers to learning. Let's take a look at some examples of the application of the criterion of the least dangerous assumption. Here we have a statement that reflects a dangerous assumption. Taylor does not have a way to show us that she understands. She cannot participate in the general education classroom. This assumption could result in segregated placement for Taylor in a separate special education classroom, keeping her away from peers and natural opportunities for learning and more communication. It might impact her access to curriculum and tends to create a prerequisite to inclusion based on her ability to perform and demonstrate her knowledge in a particular way or not. Essentially, it locates the problem within Taylor. Is this an expectation we would hold for a non-disabled student before getting access to the general education classroom? On the right, we have examples of reframed statements that reflect the least dangerous assumption. For instance, let's focus on Taylor's access to augmentative and alternative communication and give her many natural opportunities to practice. This statement relies on the assumption that communication and learning happen in natural context over time, and that Taylor has the potential to develop ways to communicate what she knows with practice. Even if Taylor is not successful in all those opportunities presented, exposing her to more communication options, more times for practice, and more people is less harmful to her present and future opportunities than it is to keep her separated from them. The next statement states, we can't know what Taylor knows without reliable communication access. We will continue to expose her to the general ed curriculum as we work on communication. This assumption reflects the idea that we cannot know what a student knows if they're not able to communicate in the ways that we understand or expect in schools, but it's least harmful to give them access to as many learning opportunities as possible. This statement leaves open the possibility that Taylor's communication is not reflective of her intelligence currently, or the idea that not being able to speak is not the same thing as not having something to say. In the end, the worst thing that happens in this case is that Taylor is exposed to but doesn't understand everything in the general ed classroom, in contrast to the consequences of not providing access to anything, when Taylor might in fact be capable of learning and understanding everything. Now you try. If the statement reflecting a dangerous assumption is that Cam's behavior is too challenging for the general ed classroom, can you think of reframed statements that would reflect the least dangerous assumption? If you can't think of any now, I encourage you to come back to this after you've completed Module 1 or Module 5, which focuses on understanding behavior. It's critical to reframe assumptions about what we think a student might be capable of and instead focus on possibilities. Therefore, it's the least dangerous assumption to presume competence. The idea of presuming competence was developed by scholar Douglas Bicklin and is defined as the principle of believing in the intellectual ability and providing opportunities to be exposed to learning, assuming the child wants to learn and assert themselves in the world. At its core, presuming competence is a principle about giving students the benefit of the doubt and moving away from focusing on their deficits to their strengths and possibilities. Presuming competence matters because it impacts everything that we do. For example, it impacts how we speak to and about students, the levels of materials and the types of activities we offer. It impacts who we place students in proximity to and the purpose of supports, the efforts we take to problem solve through challenges. Research has shown that when teachers and paraprofessionals hold high expectations for students, students are more apt to meet them. Presuming competence can be thought of as the least dangerous assumption, and it's crucial to your practice as paraprofessionals working closely with students. Inclusive education scholar Cheryl Jorgensen lays out some examples of why this is the case, listed here. First, we know that intelligence is multifaceted. There are many diverse ways to be and demonstrate intelligence, and it's not a static or one-dimensional concept. It's important that our assumptions and practice reflects that diversity. Second, measures of intelligence are flawed, especially when students have communication and movement differences. For example, intelligence tests often require reliable pointing, speaking, or writing. If a student with a disability has challenges in those areas, the test may be measuring something other than what it is intended. It's crucial that both assessments and in general, difficulties with performance should not be equated with intellectual incapacity. Third, Jorgensen tells us that research has shown that when students have access to communication and high quality instruction, they have demonstrated themselves often to be more capable than previously thought possible. In other words, we have too often been wrong about what students with disabilities are capable of. Fourth, presuming incompetence or assuming that a student does not have the capacity to learn could be harmful to the student's current and future opportunities, especially if those assumptions are wrong. And finally, even if we are wrong about students' abilities, the consequences of those incorrect presumptions are not as dangerous as the alternative. Now that we've reviewed the key concepts of the least dangerous assumption and presuming competence and their role in moving us toward the larger goal of inclusive education, take some time to review the following one-page handout on presuming competence that's linked in this slide and available in the resource section of the module. As you review, think about your role as a paraprofessional. Jot down or highlight 1 to 2 strategies that are listed that you already do every day. Jot down or highlight 1 to 2 strategies that you could try tomorrow. Thanks so much for participating in this module on Presuming Competence, a foundation of inclusive education.